we conclude this session on Next in Cybersecurity. Now we're going to move on swiftly forward to a very special session of the day, because we are very proud, humbled, privileged to have with us an extremely important global dignitary. Yes, a figure who, of course, needs no introduction. He's been the 22nd Prime Minister of Canada, someone who, of course, has enjoyed extremely close relations with India. Yes, under his leadership, India and Canada ties enjoyed great warmth, progress, and reciprocity. He also has a personal rapport with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In fact, Prime Minister Modi has been to Canada when he was in power for a bilateral visit. And we are going to now hear from Right Honorable Stephen J. Harper. He's with us this morning at the NXT Summit. So I invite you on stage, Prime Minister Harper, for your keynote address. Thank you so much for being with us today. And we are eagerly awaiting your keynote address. So warm round of applause for Prime Minister Harper, please.
Thank you very much, everybody. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to join you here at this next forum in Delhi. This is a world-class gathering, and as such it is befitting both India's rising importance in the world, but also NEC's leading role in India itself. And what better topic for me to address today than India's role in the emerging new world order. But before I discuss the role of India in the new world order, allow me to take a few minutes to ask, what is this new world order exactly? For example, you will often heard it said that the world is moving from a US-led unipolar order to a multipolar order. I do not believe that is correct, or rather, I believe that it is correct only in part. The multipolar part may be true, but the order part is not. The world is not moving from one order to another. The world is moving from order to disorder. It is moving from a global, rules-based and institution-based arrangement to something much more akin to the survival of the fittest and the triumph of the strongest. It is moving away from the idea that interaction between countries through markets and trade can be and should be mutually beneficial. It is also moving away from the idea that freedom and democracy and the values that attach to them are aspirational and beneficial for everyone. In short, it is not just a shift away from rules and institutions. It is a shift away from a mindset to a new mindset. It is a shift away from a mindset of mutual benefit to a mindset of zero sum. This has been happening progressively over the past couple of decades. Powers like Iran, Russia, and China, and others have been allowed to use global rules and institutions when it suits them, while also simultaneously using raw power to intimidate or coerce others, especially in their own neighborhoods. In effect, they have been increasingly building old-fashioned spheres of influence. The United States, with its Western allies, has been increasingly unable to rein in these developments. But now, they are increasingly unwilling to do so. Indeed, under President Trump, the United States is now turning quite explicitly to its own version of this approach. I think of the U.S. position that Ukraine's sovereignty can only be defended if it surrenders its mineral wealth to the United States. Obviously, I'm also referring to the President's musing that Canada and Greenland should be acquired by the United States. As a Canadian, I must say that I find this a shocking development. My country has long been the deepest and most balanced economic and security partner of the United States, of any, frankly, the most integrated economic and security partner of any the United States has anywhere in the world. Yet, the American president is now openly questioning Canada's sovereignty. That has been jarring for every element of Canadian public opinion. Now, I don't make this observation about America's evolution entirely out of censure. This development is somewhat understandable. After all, the rules-based order has increasingly been used as a constraint on the United States alone. It has certainly not been a constraint on its geopolitical rivals, but it has often not been a constraint on America's own allies either, because the truth is that they have too often been willing to free ride on American economic access and security guarantees, while at the same time charting international courses without any reference to their relationship to the United States. In any case, what I'm seeing in the world is that given this new multipolar disorder, and particularly given the growing rivalry between the United States and China, many smaller and weaker countries are attempting to protect themselves by hedging between these powers. However, that need not be the case for this country, India. Fortunately for India, this rising nation should be more than able to cope with this new state of affairs. Now, it's true, as I understand it, that India would have preferred a different course. India would have preferred a revamp of global rules and multilateral institutions to recognize its importance. Sadly, those such global rules and multilateral institutions now seem increasingly doomed to fall by the wayside. However, I'll come back to that. But in any case, the decline of global rules and multilateral institutions does not mean that India need to be forced into mere hedging strategies, because India is itself emerging as an important global power. And India can be that kind of power both because it is big enough and because it possesses attributes that make it an attractive partner for other major powers in the world. First, let's talk about size. India is on track to become the largest country in the world by population, if it has not already done so. Your economy, by any measure, is no less now than the fifth largest in the world, and it is growing more robustly than any other country in that top category. Combine this with your huge landmass and your unique cultural force, and India is unquestionably on track to become a new global power in its own right. Now, I do not say this to flatter, because India does have some significant challenges. Your economic structures, particularly in agriculture, could hold this country back. Also, India's military might does not yet match its economic strength. And military strength in this new dog-eat-dog world is really going to matter. And your influence, even in your own neighborhood, is today challenged, both by China on the one hand and by forces in the Islamic world on the other. But as I've said, India has attributes that make it a desirable partner rather than a target for other world powers. For example, you've long had a productive alliance with Russia. It's something that, as a longtime opponent of Vladimir Putin, I admit only grudgingly, but it is real. India's democratic ethos also makes you a compatible force with the European Union and, of course, even more importantly, with the United States, particularly as you both cannot ignore the nature of China and its long-term threats. India's status as an emerging post-colonial nation also allows you to build linkages with many others in the global south, regardless of their systems of governance. I think, for example, of the Gulf, of Africa, Brazil, many others. So despite this new emerging multipolar global disorder, India is one country that should grow in influence and that should continue to prosper. However, ladies and gentlemen, friends, if I may, we should be under no illusion that the world I'm talking about, the world that is emerging, is not a desirable state of affairs for humanity. In fact, this state of affairs ominously mirrors the rivalries of the pre-World War I period, and history tells us where that led. God help us as we enter a new such period with its combination of advanced weaponry and computer power. So for this reason, I do hope that India will not totally succumb to hard power, sphere of influence global politics, but that you will, on some level, also continue to champion the soft power values of the free and democratic civilization of which you are a member. Look at the challenges that confront us. The need for continued global growth and prosperity, energy and climate, pandemics and human health, sustainable development goals, and of course, peace and security. I put it to you that none of these things will do well over time if the world is left only with spheres of influence and deals between strongmen. On all those matters, humanity will need an enlightened voice from an India that is both free and democratic and imbued with an understanding of the needs of the people of the global South. In fact, no one will be better positioned, no country will be better positioned to be that civilized voice for broader human interests than India. The West today is unable to do so. It has been through a period of profoundly weak leadership. It has seen Western powers gravitate between nihilistic self-censure and haughty moral lecturing. In that regard, the strongman approach of Trump, with all its downsides, is probably a necessary corrective. Let's hope, however, that it is a short-term one, because America is still the world's preeminent power by multiple measures, and the world needs America to be strong, yes, but also to be idealistic. In the meantime, however, this country, India, is one of the few that is experiencing both strong leadership and a positive forward direction. One of the very few. I go around the world, this country is exceptional in that regard right now. The India I visit regularly is buzzing with optimism and ambition. India is modernizing at home and moving forward on a myriad of relationships abroad, and it is doing many useful things. I think, for example, of India's G20 presidency, where your country spoke not merely for itself, but for an entire cohort of nations and their concerns from Latin America to Africa and elsewhere. I still believe that India's rise as a free and democratic power, while distinct from the West, has the potential to lead to an Asian century, not an Asian century in the communist Chinese style of coercion and disruption, but an Asian century of benevolent cooperation and collaboration. I've spoken before of India's great potential, not merely as a mere echo of Western liberalism, but as a free and democratic society shaped by its own history, culture, and nationalism. That, I believe, is one of humanity's great hopes for light in what are these darkening times. It is, in fact, the very nature of India that allows for forums like this, truly global ones, of competing ideas and thoughtful exchange. Now, I do want to address one other question and one other set of issues, and that is the elephant in the room. And this is not an Asian elephant or an African elephant. This is a Canadian elephant. I'd also hope that my own country, Canada, will reestablish benevolent and productive relations with yours. As Prime Minister, I put a lot of effort into revitalizing our relationship. During the administrations of both the late, great Manmohan Singh and, needless to say, the dynamic Narendra Modi. There are so many ways in which Canada and India are both compatible and complementary. Both the prime ministers that I dealt with understood that. And frankly, I have been heartbroken to watch the steady deterioration of this relationship under my successor. I don't think I entirely understand why that is, and I am certainly in no position to evaluate the accusations that have been made. Suffice it to say this, that when I was in office, my government understood, and we understood without any nuance, that the vast majority of Canadians generally, and the vast majority of Indo-Canadians specifically, do not align themselves with people who would wish to see the division of India, this great country. Let me leave it at that, except to add that now, with my own country, Canada, facing for the first time in well over 100 years a hostile United States, we on our side need to rebuild the Canada-India relationship as never before. In any case, as you here in India navigate this new world, as you build on your own strengths and deftly create linkages both west and east and north and south, I hope you will not forget about us in Canada, nor will you forget that a truly great world power strives to create peace and prosperity for all of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that address, Prime Minister Harper. You've truly set the tone, of course, for India-Canada ties ahead, and also given us much to ponder about India's position in the New World Order. But I'd urge you to please stay on stage for a very special question and answer session as well. There are some further questions that my colleague Megha Sharma would like to pose to you on your address and your wider vision for not just South Asia, but the world at large. So now over to Megha for this next special session as we continue Prime Minister Harper's time with us on stage at the NXT Summit.
Thank you, Uday, and a very warm welcome from all of us at NEXT to you, Honorable Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Let's dive straight into it, and we are talking about NEXT in democracy. How important is it for one of the oldest and the largest democracies, whether it is talking about Canada and talking about India, to work together in this multipolar world than to be drifting apart as we see in the current state of affairs?
Look, I think it's very important. You know, I do think, well, I talked about the fact that, you know, it's kind of increasingly a multipolar disorder everywhere and increasingly dog eat dog. I do think there is still, most of the time, fundamentally a difference between democratic and authoritarian regimes. Authoritarian regimes, by the very nature of their power structures, tend to be aggressive, predatory. And I think democratic nations, by their very structures, power structures and processes, tend to be countries that look for cooperation, collaboration, look for mutual gain instead of zero sum. So in that regard, I think it's very important that democracies work together. Look, President Trump's views on this are harder to ascertain right now. What I will try and say charitably is it's clear that President Trump doesn't regard democracy as sufficient to work together. There also has to be a real alignment of interests and activities, and I don't disagree with that. But I just hope it's not forgetting that the nature of America and of our countries, India and Canada, means that we really do have a special ability and mission to make the world as a whole a better place.
Right, absolutely. And you talk about President Trump and his second term as the U.S. president of talking about, in the larger scheme of things, there has been a dramatic shift in his policy vis-a-vis Canada, whether it is talking about huge tariffs being imposed, the threats that he has been issuing, talking about making Canada the 51st state of United States of America. How do you view the current state of affairs, particularly in this dynamism that we witness right after his election as the president?
Well, first, Miga, I think it's important to say, and I'll be the first to admit, I have been surprised by a number of things President Trump has done, both domestically and foreign, not all bad, but I've been surprised in the sense that I expected more continuity with the first term. Yes, I did expect him to be more bold and aggressive in the directions he was going, but there has been some significant discontinuity, and one of them, of course, is what seems to be increasingly hostile view of a number of traditional allies. And in all honesty, I can't entirely explain it in the case of Canada. In fact, I can't really explain it at all. There is no doubt that President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau had a poor relationship, and there's kind of hostility on that level. But President Trump's comments about Canada go well beyond disagreements with our government. President Trump has repeatedly asserted that Canada, in both economic and security terms, is a massive drain. First of all, on economic terms, that Canada is a massive drain on the American economy. He has asserted that on the security front that we are an enormous burden on American security and present a significant security, large-scale security threat on our border. The difficulty I have with these things, and it's not to suggest that there aren't economic or security irritants we can discuss, and certainly Canada should be spending more on defense, but these are propositions of President Trump are just fundamentally untrue. Canada-U.S. trade is 98% tariff-free and almost entirely beyond that unencumbered by non-tariff barriers. It's the most integrated economic relationship in the world. Canada is the United States. Right now we have a small surplus with the United States, but Canada is the United States' largest export market in the world. We are a larger, and many Americans don't understand this, Canada is a larger export market to the United States than all the countries of the European Union combined. It is a massive economic asset for the United States. Obviously, they are an even bigger asset relatively for us, but it's a massive economic asset. In terms of security, are there issues on the border? Yes, but the northern border is not the southern border. They're not hundreds of thousands or millions of people crossing the border. In fact, I think Canadian law enforcement will tell you the flow of guns, gangs, and drugs come just as much north from the United States as they do south to Canada. In fact, I would suspect they come north much more frequently than south. So these positions of the president are just not based on fact. I will also say, Miga, because we don't know where this is headed, that I don't think they represent any significant element of American public opinion. There is no significant American economic lobby pressing for comprehensive tariffs against Canada. In fact, quite the contrary. The vast majority of the economic actors in the United States would oppose tariffs on Canada because it would hurt the American economy. There is no movement for annexation of Canada in the United States. There was over 100 years ago, but I'm not even aware of the existence of an organization in the United States that advocates that. So these seem to be, at the moment, views of President Trump. For what reason, we don't know. They shouldn't be dismissed because he is the president and he has the capacity to create public opinion in his own right. But as I say, it's I think most Canadians are finding this kind of a parallel universe.
Right, absolutely. So then, why do you think in his second term he has come down so heavily on Canada? Why this dramatic foreign policy shift when you talk about the country?
I do not know. I tell people there are 5 possible layers of explanation. One is that it's shock effect, entertainment, dominating the headlines. Second is that intense dislike of the current government of Canada and its Prime Minister that's personal. The third is that it's laying the groundwork for some kind of laying the groundwork for leverage for some kind of big ask from Canada on the trade or security front. But what that is, I don't know, and nobody does. The fourth explanation is that he is actually an ideological protectionist who believes that economic activity should be moved to the United States, even if it's mutually beneficial to trade. And the fifth explanation, that he is actually an annexationist who would like to create the largest contiguous empire in the history of humanity by getting Canada and Greenland to be part of the United States. I tell people I think it's all of these things. But what we don't know is what is actually important to President Trump and what he will press forward with. I must admit, as I say, I don't, the President of the United States can make his own decisions, but I don't understand, given all the challenges in the world and all the challenges that the United States has at home and abroad, why this kind of almost warlike footing with Canada makes any sense. I just don't understand it.
And what do you think are going to be the political implications domestically for Canada, because elections are looming?
Yeah, look, political implications are already enormous. And really ironic, because if Mr. Trump, as we all know, intensely dislikes the current government, he's actually put them back in the game politically. The entire issue set has changed. The entire issue set in Canada up until a few weeks ago was the poor performance of the Canadian economy, frankly, very poor performance of the Canadian economy. We have declining living standards in the average Canadian household, and a lot of hostility to the government about that economic performance and about cost of living factors. Now, I'm not saying those issues have gone away, but they're not much more now in the realm of the greater economic and national threat to the country's future itself. And by definition, when a country is under that kind of a threat, there tends to be some rallying to the incumbent government. It becomes more difficult for opposition parties to attack the current government on day-to-day management. So, whereas, to be blunt, 2 months ago, we would have had almost certainty that the current government would be defeated in the upcoming elections, which we expect very soon. Now, I think we expect it to be a close election. I still think my party, the opposition Conservative Party, will win, but that is not a foregone conclusion the way it was a few weeks ago.
That's interesting. And also, there, like you said, there have already been so many problems. For years together, the Canadian GDP has been tumbling. You're speaking about the standard of living. Grocery rates have been skyrocketing. People are complaining. And this was the case under the Trudeau government. How do you think, as you said, there may be implications with Trump administration coming and attacking Canada, economic policies are then going to be impacted heavily. But how does the average Canadian think and react to all these developments?
I think at first there was some of this, the first kind of tweets the president did on this, calling Justin Trudeau the governor of the 51st state, saying that, our great famous hockey star Wayne Gretzky should become the new governor. I think people thought this was kind of a joke and really directed at Mr. Trudeau. And let's remember, Mr. Trudeau is so unpopular that his own party just basically removed him from office. But the truth is that the president's statements on this have been they're impossible to dismiss as a joke. The president has repeatedly made the case now of not just why Canada should be part of the United States and why Canada should not exist. As I say, he has accused Canada of being an economic drain. He has accused Canada of being a security risk to the United States. And he has further even gone so far as to say that the tariffs he threatens to put on Canada, 25% across the board. By the way, important to realize, putting a 25% across the board tariff on Canada would be a complete abrogation of the tariff-free trade agreement President Trump himself signed with Canada. And he has been saying that he will do this, and that part of the reason for doing it is to force Canada economically to join the United States. So these are the actual statements he's been making. So I think, Miga, it's gone way beyond something we can just dismiss as a joke. Now, look, I've told Canadians to be calm. The president has threatened many things he hasn't done. He backed off 25% tariffs a month ago. He says he's going to do them this month. I don't know. We obviously have to be prepared. But as I say, let's not panic until we see what actually happens. Let's have plans, but let's not panic. And let's retain a respectful discourse with the United States. The reality is, notwithstanding whatever is driving President Trump, can the United States are great friends, partners, and allies. Our peoples are very close. And it is not in our interest to escalate this. It's our interest to, deal with whatever does have to be dealt with. We're very unclear what that is, but find a productive way forward. So, be prepared, but be prepared for the worst, but don't contribute to it.
Okay, thank you, Prime Minister Harper. There are a lot of members from the audience who would like to ask you a lot of questions. So let's open the floor for our guests. Can we have the first question? Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you for that very insightful interview. And Shri Kartikeya Sharma, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, has a very...
I think we've got a mic problem.
Very...
Good morning, Prime Minister. I wanted to know, in the face of a hostile America, how do you see the bilateral ties between Canada, India, and also the trade relations?
Yeah, trade in Canada.
Indian Canada.
Look, I believe...
Trade between, trade
Yeah,
between
look,
India and Canada.
I believe very strongly that Canada and India need to deepen their economic relationship. When I was in office, we were successful in negotiating a social security agreement, also a nuclear cooperation agreement. We had started discussions on foreign investment protection and promotion agreement. And we'd even had some preliminary discussions on a trade agreement. So I think there's a universal agreement in Canada that we would like to deepen our both investment and trade flows with India. That has been happening, not happening at the rate it should be happening, in my opinion, given the complementarity of our economies. But that has been happening. And I certainly think now it's an imperative. I mean, obviously, given the overwhelming majority of our trade that goes to the United States, it's now more important than ever that Canada diversify its trade, and India is a logical place for that to happen.
Yes, Prime Minister Tony Abbott would actually like to ask that question. Asavi, could we get that mic over here, please, quickly?
Well, Stephen, thank you for that very thoughtful and insightful address. I'm going to suggest later today that on balance, Trump is more good than bad for the wider world. And I'm wondering what you think. Is he more good or is he more bad for the wider world?
Yeah, look, Tony, Prime Minister Abbott, great question. Look, I thought, looking back, I'd be very candid. I looked at the last time President Trump was in office, those 4 years. Obviously a time of upheaval. He challenged many basic assumptions of U.S. foreign policy. And then we had 4 years of the Biden administration. I think it is unquestionably the case that the world was stronger and safer under the first Trump administration than under the Biden administration. We had, subsequent to Trump leaving office, we had 2 major wars break out, and threats of wars elsewhere. We had the further retreat of democracy and democratic nations around the world. And frankly, I thought just a heightened lack of clarity from the West about who its friends and enemies were. I mean, we saw it with this country. We saw in the rather cool treatment that the Modi government got from the Biden administration frequently. We saw those kinds of issues. So, Tony, I would have told you and felt very strongly that during the election, based on everything the president was saying, that the world would become once again stronger and safer under a new Trump administration. I think the jury is now out. I think we've got to admit that we're all being thrown some curveballs. And the curveballs are two things, one of which I already alluded to. The president's seemingly agnostic view about whether a country is democratic or not as being an important thing. President Trump's and a willingness to make nice with Russia, with Turkey, and others, while at the same time launching, attacks on Canada, Denmark, others, I think raises real red flags. And I think it's just the broader case that it's not clear who in the president's mind are friends and who are opponents. And I must tell you, well, look, I understand the geopolitical argument that wouldn't it be great if the United States could cement a better relationship with Russia and pull Russia away from China. That's a great theoretical argument. The problem is this. You and I, and more so me, my time in office, spent a lot of time with Vladimir Putin. Like, I watched George W. Bush and Barack Obama try to make an ally of Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin doesn't want to be an ally and is not an ally and will never be an ally. He is a geopolitical rival of the United States who is intent on the destruction of American power in the world. And the fact that President Trump doesn't seem to understand that, I think, is very concerning. The fact that President Trump wants, as I said earlier, Democratic allies to pony up, put real resources on the table, participate with the United States, make concrete contributions to shared values and shared goals, as the Israelis have done, frankly, as your government in Australia has often done, and some other allies have done. That's understandable. But as I say, just gratuitous attacks on countries like Canada and Denmark are incomprehensible. Denmark, Greenland. The United States has military bases in Greenland. The Danes are completely in cooperation with the Americans on these issues. Why are they attacking a Danish territory? It makes no sense. So I think, Tony, this, it's possible this will sort itself out and the president's overall objectives will become clearer. But I have to say at the moment that he has created, I think, far greater uncertainty. First of all, economic uncertainty around the world. You're starting to see markets get jittery. And more importantly, I think he's created really serious uncertainties in a range of capitals, not just in Europe, but also now in the Asia-Pacific. Real uncertainty about whether the United States is really committed to kind of a global security alliance with other democratic nations around the world. Perhaps that'll be corrected, but right now I think it is in serious doubt.
Sauri, there are more questions that our members of audience want to ask.
Prime Minister, thank you for an excellent talk and your question-answer session. May I ask one more question in relation to what you just said in your comments? Is seeing that India and Canada are both middle power countries, what are the, especially in this multipolar world, what are the key areas of collaboration that you see between other democratic multipolar countries beyond the obvious keys of technology, let's say, trade, etc.? What can you see beyond that with the other middle power democratic countries?
Well, if there is to be a global democratic security alliance, there is no reason why India and Canada can't be more robust participants in that. When I was Prime Minister, we greatly strengthened security collaboration between the security agencies of our two countries. Collaboration, contact became very regular. It wasn't Five Eyes regular, but we had elevated it significantly. You know, India has since become engaged in the Quad. Canada has not become engaged in those Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific exercises. It should. I think under a new Conservative government it would. So certainly on the security front. The economic front, obviously trade, but you know, more important than trade is just the greater security that provides both our countries. Canada has, as you know, immense mineral and energy resources that India wants. Canada is not today in a position to export those. It should be. That is a link that could be built, and likewise, Canada could use the diversification of its market, particularly given the current troubles with the United States. So that economic partnership could be not just more fully developed, but developed in a way that really bolsters the securities of both our countries and of our allies. Finally, we could really and should really greatly enhance the people-to-people links. As you know, we now have, I think it's getting close to 2 million Canadians of Indian background. Many come back here not just to visit, but to do business. There are growing linkages. I will give the government of Prime Minister Modi great credit for not disrupting those people-to-people ties, given the current coolness between the governments. But we should be building those. And look, let me be very blunt on the Canadian side. On the Canadian side, as I said in my remarks, Canadians generally, and Indo-Canadians specifically, are overwhelmingly supportive of this country's unity and of our ties to this country. And it is about time that all political parties and politicians in Canada made building those people-to-people ties that represent the vast majority of our peoples the priority, and not the priority of building relations with Khalistanis. When I was Prime Minister, it was very clear to anyone in my government there was to be no interaction with Khalistanis in Canada. They are a fringe minority of the Canadian population. They are injurious to good relations between our countries. And that should be put aside. In Canada, you have a right to be a Khalistani. It's a democratic opinion. But it should not be infiltrating our governing party, and it should not be inhibiting good people-to-people relations between India and Canada.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prime Minister Harper, for this wonderful, insightful session. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. A huge round of applause for Prime Minister
Thank you.
Stephen Harper.